The journey is conversations with ordinary people about stories of transformation and how we may have had setbacks in our life and how we persevered through those, how we've learned from those obstacles, and how they've maybe helped us on our path today. So, Dalton, when we originally started, welcome back to the journey. And when we originally started the journey, way back in episode 1, it was the beginning of your first year of being the head wrestling coach for Belvidere Co-Op. And now you guys just finished up the state finals. You had 2 of your wrestlers down. Successful year as far as what you were able to do from a team that, went from 2 individual schools to a co-op. Meant they were blending 2 schools together, and you went undefeated in the duels. I don't know how long ago it was that.
24 years.
24 years ago, okay. And then you got second in the conference meet and second in regionals, right?
Yes.
And so that's a huge turnaround in the program. And so I just want to kind of have you just reflect on that. I know the last time we were on, we talked about how wrestling can be wrestling as well as contact sport can be a platform of developing resiliency. But I also wanted now to have you talk about just kind of reflecting back on what things have you learned in this 2-year experience of coaching and going back to your community that you used to wrestle for. Isn't always an easy thing. So what are some things that you learned along the way? And
yeah, I mean, a tremendous amount of stuff that I've learned. I think any situation that I go into, that's what I'm constantly trying to do, is mine the situation for information that I don't normally have. So going into the opportunity, it was like, okay, let's see what things can be accomplished, right? Knowing what variables need to be accounted for in order to enact change, right? So coaching staff, can I get a quality staff? Or because as a high school program, the budget's not really there, right? So it's not like you have this endless budget. You can go hire the best of the best, right? And then on top of that, it's after school, and after school is 3:30 to 5:30.
Sure.
And that means like how many people work a job where they can get off of work by 3 o'clock to get to practice.
Right.
That's a challenge because most people now work past 4 o'clock. I mean, maybe before this, people always work till 5 o'clock,
Right.
So it's a really challenging experience. And then on top of that, you're talking about getting kids to buy into an idea or a collective vision that they've literally never seen. Being a part of the Belvidere wrestling program, you've never, 24 years, right? And so when I was in high school 12 years ago, 14 years ago, I'm getting older, 14 years ago, it wasn't, my freshman and sophomore year, we had a competitive team. And so my junior, senior year, there was no competitive team. And then junior, senior, then after I graduated, it split into 2 programs. And throughout the time that there's been 2 programs, no one has ever thought that either of the Belvidere programs were going to be the best program in the conference or in the state, for that matter.
Sure.
Or the region or whatever. We were, that program has never had that identity. Right. And so, getting the right coaches, getting people that were a part of the program when they were younger, people that had success. I had a coach who was one of the 5 state champions in Belvidere history, one who is another IHSA state finalist, myself, and then another one who's a IHSA state champion, and then the another guy who was the longtime head coach, who's basically coached everybody that was on the staff as well as coached with the other assistants. So it was really like cool to get everybody back together.
Were they all Belvidere? All those assistants were all Belvidere coaches? Or Belvidere were wrestlers?
Everybody in the high school level was, and then obviously at the kids level, it just so happened to work out that Cal Ferry, who is a 3-time state champion for McChesney Park Harlem, he moved into the area, so he started helping with the kids program. So to get all of that into one program was a feat in itself. Yeah. And then on top of that, just starting to change the identity. And this year, one of the biggest, the phrase that I wanted to create was around the idea of a championship mentality. Mm-hmm. The mentality of chasing the highest point because you can, mm-hmm. right? A mentality where you want to put yourself at the top because you're capable like anybody else to do it, and you deserve it, and you deserve to put yourself there. So that championship mentality, I think, has really started to take hold, and it continues when we go to the state tournament, and we have 2 wrestlers go there. One's a senior, one's a freshman, and they competed well. They didn't compete to their fullest potential, but they're upset about it. They're not happy about it. They were emotional with the result of not getting what they wanted, and that's a good thing. Yeah. It's when people go to those environments and go, "Hey, we made it," and that's when there's not another level to get to. And seeing, specifically my freshman, seeing him upset that he didn't accomplish his goal, and seeing how he reacted, that means that there is a championship mentality there. They're not accepting failure, which is really cool. Yeah,
very nice. And I think there's a huge difference between someone they were just grateful that they got a ticket to be invited to the dance, and then someone that goes in there with the mentality that they're going to continue striving if they place or don't perform that they want. But as we've talked many times before, even when someone doesn't perform the way that they want to perform, or the outcome isn't what they want, it's just as much an opportunity to learn and grow from, regardless if they're a freshman or a senior, because it may not be the last time they wrestle, and it surely isn't going to be the last time that they're going to compete in life. Right? Yeah. There's always going to be things for them to use it as a platform in which to grow regarding life. Obviously, the freshman has a few more years in high school wrestling, but your senior, regardless if he wrestles in college or not, he'll still have life to...
Yeah. No, absolutely. This is why I coach, because I know the transformations that I've had through it, and it just so happens that here's this thing that you really like to do. Yeah. And when you inject this standard of performance, right? When you inject this standard of performance, of consistency, of discipline, right? That's what creates that human being that takes every scenario the same approach. Mm-hmm. How do I figure it out? How do I achieve my best possible outcome? How do I control my behaviors and not let the behaviors of others impact me, right? All of these types of things.
So I want to go back to some of the things that you talked about at the beginning of, in particular, this season. And if we just look at outcomes for a second. So last year, you guys, how'd you guys place? I guess it would be 2019. How'd you place in conference in 2019, if you remember?
If I remember, I think we got 5th. 5th,
okay. And dual meet wise, how'd you guys?
We had, I want to say we were less than 500.
Less than 500.
I think we definitely had a losing record last year.
Okay. And then I
only won a handful of duels.
Yeah, and I know that, if we go back even before that, it's not really a fair comparison, right? Because it was 2 separate programs. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, you could go back to it. I was an assistant coach at that time.
Yeah.
And I can talk about that because, I mean, that was something that it was black. It's what you see today versus 3 years ago in the room practicing is black or white. It's completely different.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that thing.
Just in 3 years ago, when I was an assistant coach, I was brought in by somebody because of my experience, and they said, "Hey, you do this stuff. I think that would be good." And I said, "All right, cool." I did it, and the kids didn't initially respond very well to it because it was such a change, right? And instead of continuing to share the message and the standard, it was basically the plan was aborted, and then going back to let's just do whatever they want to do. Meaning the kids, and obviously that's the difference between discipline and default. Is the default is what feels good, what's easiest, what's not so challenging of ourselves, right? And so that was something that I really struggled with, because I know that as a kid, there are a few individuals that are going to push themselves because they're internally motivated, right? Few kids. There's a few people in this world that possess internal motivation, especially for sports or other activities. It's the environment and the leaders that are in charge of those that need to push and communicate those who are not internally motivated to see a why that's greater than themselves, to be able to continue to do those things.
And that leads right into how would you say from the beginning of this season of the idea of striving to be a champion, having a championship team, planting that seeds with them, putting together a team of coaches, right? And then first it was putting together a team of coaches, and then planting that vision of that why, and obviously there was a whole other aspect of what the plan was, meaning how was the practices going to be run, and what things did you want to achieve during that time period. What was it like initially, if you remember back to preseason and the beginning of the season, when you first started planting those seeds about this idea about, oh yeah, we're going to win conference this year?
Yeah. So the beginning of this season or beginning of the first season I took over?
Well, I guess the reason why I asked that is because, well, maybe you can clarify for me. Was it this season that just finished, or was it 2 seasons ago that you started talking about a championship team, a championship room?
Definitely this season.
Okay.
Last season I pulled back because there were individuals involved in the program that were seniors that were around the program that I knew that if I pushed too hard with them, seeing how they've been, they were around 3 years of a mediocre environment. I knew that if I pushed then, there would be more complications with parents, right? Parents would be complaining because their kids would be complaining.
Sure.
Their kids would be complaining then, so there was a less of a group of people. I knew what I had, and I didn't have somebody, and I knew that the system wasn't going to allow me to push that early. So it wasn't until this year that I started to get a group of kids in the room that cared about the outcome, that were receptive to the message, and then that's where I started to really play with the idea of bringing back, and all the coaches started to come. Last year I didn't have the same coaching staff.
Yeah.
This year, every time I look at a coach, they've been in the state finals.
Yeah.
That's a huge deal, because before the state tournament, one of the communications I said, my coach, Danny Martinez, he was a 2-time state placer. He qualified for the state tournament twice. He's 2 for 2. He got down there and he took something home. My other assistant, Nick Finkbinder, right? He went downstate 1 year. He got second in the state. I went downstate 4 times, got 4 medals. So just this idea that there was a guy to point to be like, he knows the way.
It's possible.
Right? And then when you have the majority of adults in the room, the leaders, right? The majority of the leadership is by people that have been there. That makes it easier to not be a hypocrite. It's easier for a kid to be like, okay, I'm gonna buy in, because if it's one person, it's real easy to be that person's I don't like that person. Right.
Or he was the exception, not the rule.
Yeah.
In the room,
exactly.
When you have that many state placers, all state individuals, it's not they're the exception.
Yeah.
This is the norm.
And that's so the biggest thing that I've been trying to impact is the collective culture in the community, the chip on the shoulder that says, no, this is what we do, we deserve this, no matter if we're from a small town of Belvidere, right? No matter if our parents don't have a great economic situation, no matter what, that you have that culture of this is what we do. It's challenging, but it's definitely been progressing.
Sure, yeah. And when would you say this year? I mean, when it moved from verbally, when did it move from these are from both, I guess, coaches as well as athletes? When did it move from the talk to the talk and the walk? When did you notice in the season that it shifted, that they started believing that this was more than just a possibility, it was their reality?
As a team, right?
As a team, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. After we beat Hananiga in the duel, right? That was like, we've always lost to Hananiga, 24 years. We've beat everybody else in the conference. We have to go wrestle Rockford East at Rockford East. And that's when I started to talk to the kids about, ending the season undefeated, ending the season as the top team in the duels and looking to conference. And that's when I started getting the text messages from the kids saying, hey, I'm ready to train harder, put me, can I practice with so-and-so, right? Or when I said, it's time to practice, they practiced with a lot more focus and had intentional training. So it was definitely right after the Hananiga duel, as we went into our last week of duels against Harvard and Rockford East, because Harvard, they have a really good, solid 1A program. So they always have full lineup. They always have pretty decent individuals, and we lost to them. We got second place at the Harvard tournament to them, who got first at the Harvard tournament. And so in the duel, we were like, okay, we're going to get them back, and then we're going to beat East. And that's what we did. We beat Harvard and we beat East, and it was a lot of fun from a collective. And that's, that was when I think people started to realize that, we need to be competitive, and having that belief, not to mention I have a couple kids that are in the room that are achievers in wrestling. So now the other people are like, I want to achieve, and they get more emotionally affected when they lose, and they're not like their teammates. Their teammates won, I didn't win. Why didn't I win? Yeah. Well, maybe you need to start doing what they're doing. Right? And thinking like they think. Right. And then everything starts to change.
Yeah. I think that it is a very cool thing to watch and an experience that and especially in this case, in again a short time period overall, but and that's the upside about sports seasons, right? There's, at least for the season, there's a beginning, there's a building process, there's a beginning, there's a middle, and then there's an end, and you get to see that unfolding of that story, right? Yeah. And then of course you rinse and repeat, right? Or improve and then repeat it. But there is that element where you can then look back on it and go, okay, these things we put in place were good. And it took a little bit, but even along the way, before the masses believed, they were already putting forth greater effort than they had previous years, maybe.
Yeah.
And then you could see them psychologically turn the corner.
Yeah.
And so that is it's fun to experience. It's fun to watch when that happens. And
yeah, it is.
So if you look back on that, though, if there was anything that you learned about yourself or learned for yourself, I mean, there was obviously things that you experienced. What would be something that you would have taken away from that you learned about? Let's say first learned about yourself in that process. You had a lot of the things that you put in place were things that you envisioned of what you wanted to do, and a lot of them moved that direction. But what would you say that you learned about yourself or learned?
I mean, personally, I definitely have gained more confidence in my thoughts and philosophies.
Sure.
Because, when I came into this situation, I was pretty confident that this was possible, that it's possible to really impact an environment if everybody buys into the philosophies. All the leaders buy into the philosophy. Yeah. And then, I definitely learned more about interacting with kids and holding space for them, right? We've talked about the situation where, there's a kid who was having, just issues. He was on medication for stuff that he probably shouldn't have been on medication for. He got off of the medication, but during the time where he was, just getting into it, he was having trouble in the room and then outside of the room in class, and just being able to find ways to really deal with that situation was I definitely learned, I think, a little bit more about how to interact with kids that are maybe not open to something, and then holding space for them and reminding them that that you're not there to lead them in the wrong direction, right? And you're so that's something I definitely learned, and I think I wish I could explain it and articulate it more, because I think that's the perspective that people forget. It's like wrestling itself isn't the end goal, right? But it's the only thing that we have to use to get these kids to go through the hero's journey to self-discovery and then become better than they are currently.
Yeah. Well, and I think that is, one of the big elements, and obviously my backs, being a counselor, being a social worker, working in the schools as both a social worker and as a coach, and then after I left the schools and stuff, was this idea of what the platform in which sports can allow that to happen, and recognizing that there's a bigger story going on than just how do they place in a meet, or how do they place or how do they do in a game, or whatever it is. That it's really about building relationships to build character, building relationships to help them see beyond their perspective that they walked in with, right? Yeah. And I think that's a big aspect. And I remember, when I was coaching and helping out the wrestling team at Harlem at that time, and that was during Cal's time period, and that we would have, and Harlem was doing well at that time. I think it was mostly Harlem East, and Hononegah were the top three, and for a long time that was what was going on. But I remember going down to the meets, and it was important that certain wrestlers went down that may not have qualified, but it was still important for them to go down just to see the arena, just to see how big Champaign, how big the center is, because you don't want to experience that the first time when you have a singlet on. You know? So you need to be able to experience it, even if you're just sitting in the stands, because there's already going to be enough nerves anyways. And so I think all those things are a huge learning opportunity, growth opportunity to stretch them.
Yeah.
So as you think about now, what are some of the opportunities you're looking at for future-wise?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I have the opportunities. One of the things that, unfortunately comes with progress is you find out where the limitations are.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I'm struggling with right now are the limitations of the systems that are built on top of or underneath sports in general, basically around schools in general, and the administration, school districts, whether it's the school board or the people, the superintendent, and so on and so forth, and where they put their value as far as what they need to focus on and how they need to focus on it, and that hierarchy of focus isn't really thoughtful. Mm-hmm. It's kind of based off of how it's always been done. And, just from the simple fact of testing, mm-hmm. The state has a lot of focus on testing, and how you do is how you get paid, or even that aspect of like people get paid on attendance. Schools get funded by attendance, right? And so in certain scenarios, there lacks vision because of scarcity of like, well, if we do things different and it doesn't go well, how are we gonna get funding or whatever? And so the challenge is that I see is that people don't have that outside perspective to be ambitious enough to change the system to create different outcomes. Mm-hmm. And they haven't thought about different ways. So, and on top of that, the biggest challenge on top of that is like when you change anything, people don't like it, because that means that they have to change.
Right.
And if people have to change to adhere to a system that they feel shouldn't be like that, they're going to complain. They're going to be upset. They're going to voice their frustrations. And almost always that is a minority. But the opposite doesn't make noise, right? The people that are okay with the change, they're not going out yelling. They're not upset about it. They're not emotional about it. They're okay with it, I guess. And from my experience, people don't like difficult conversations or arguments or telling people the truth that hurts their feelings. Yeah. And
Well, it's interesting. There's no doubt that when change happens, there's a perceived threat, and when that perceived threat is there, that's when it kicks people into this fight or flight natural response to it, and there's energy, and so that energy usually comes out in negativity and complaining. We don't necessarily get the same kind of energy when we're inspired or when we're okay with whatever the change may be.
Yeah.
We don't get the same kind of energy. And if I jump on board with what the vision is before it's unfolded, I'm in a vulnerable state. I could be, in a vulnerable state of being ridiculed. I could be wrong. So it's easier, even if you're on board, to be quiet. It takes a boldness and a fierceness and a courage to commit to, I'm on board with this new way of doing it in the face of the unknown.
Yeah.
It doesn't take that much energy, because you're automatically getting energy when you feel threatened, and people feel threatened when there's change, and that's just a natural response that we all have. And I think and some people have had success that if I complain loud enough, well, they won't change, or we can get them out of there, or we can, we'll be loud enough that I won't have to participate in the change.
That and protecting limitations.
Yeah.
People that don't believe that they can achieve greatness don't want to be a part of a system that's trying to achieve greatness.
Well, to expose my mediocre.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it is, even though I think that is an element of difficulty, and we have to, kind of like what you did in the wrestling program, I think ultimately it's that, finding those key individuals who will be your first followers, your key key followers, which really will be your key leaders that are the step down, right, for you. And then they then collectively, your assistant coaches in this case with wrestling, they then have collectively more power than just you by yourself. And especially like last year, maybe even going, feeling like you're constantly fighting against your own coaching staff. So I think that's one of the key is getting the right first followers, buying into the vision, having a vision, and like you said, that idea of timing. There's a key of being able to assess, is this the right time to unleash this, or do I need to wait another year to unleash it? Is it the right thing to do to step away because of the current circumstance, or do I need to move ahead? I think some of that timing, because there's unknown there, it takes courage to step through that.
Yeah.
So, Dalton, as always, I appreciate your insights, and I know the listeners appreciate the insights, because even though this time we're talking about wrestling and sport, which we almost always do as the platform, we're talking about a lot more. We're